places. Just to assure members, we're going to return to the Climate and Nature Bill and Simon Hoare.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As I was saying, says the Minister, I was tempted to scare the House by saying, having concluded my opening remarks, but I better not. I want to address directly, if I may, the Minister and the Treasury bench. And I want to do so sincerely because I admire and like the Honourable Lady enormously, and I hope she knows that. But she will know that there are a vast number of her colleagues sitting behind her and elsewhere who are supportive of the general thrust of this bill and are looking for a generous response from the government, in order to avoid having to divide the House, but more importantly to make progress on these issues which I know full well she holds very close to her heart. And I say to her, not in a spirit of in any way sort of ransom or blackmail, how the government responds when it comes to sum up this debate will, I think, in many ways shape and sculpt how those of us who are supporting this bill will respond in kind. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I was bringing my remarks to a conclusion by saying that some had said those who support this are sort of dangerous, land-grabbing, Stalinistic, anti-farming land grabbers. Well, let me quote, and I opened my speech by saying I wanted to speak specifically to fellow Conservative colleagues, both in this place and in the country, where the siren voices of simplistic populism try to call us and drag us onto rocks that we would be well advised to avoid. But let me close with the words of a dangerous left-wing activist. It is mankind and his activities which are changing the environment of our planet in damaging and dangerous ways. We must use science to cast a light ahead. And the same dangerous lefty, but the threat of our world comes not only from tyrants and their tanks, appropriate given the statement we've just had, it can be more insidious, though less visible. The dangers of global warming is as yet unseen, but real enough for us to make changes and sacrifices so that we do not live at the expense of future generations. And again, we must remember our duty to nature before it is too late. Now, what radical Stalinist am I quoting from? Which Guardian writing journalist am I purloining phrases from? Well, it's that dangerous lefty Margaret Thatcher herself. The first quote from her United Nations speech in 1989. Her views and my party's views formed by science and the facts. Her basic university training when at Somerville College, Oxford. And the second quote was from the Second World Climate Conference after she had left office in 1990. I say to Conservatives today, we will be well advised still to heed her caution, her advice and her words.
Alice Macdonald.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the opportunity to speak on this bill today and on this very important subject. And can I pay tribute to the Honourable Member for the South Cotswolds for her passionate speech and for giving us all an opportunity to discuss this subject. Can I also welcome the Right Honourable Member's contribution. It is very good to see so far so much consensus across the House on these issues. Having campaigned on climate change before entering this place and with a constituency where so many people care about this issue, I know how vital it is that we take bold action to protect our planet. The science is clear. Last year was the warmest year on record and the first year to exceed 1.5 degrees C of warming above pre-industrial levels. And we have seen a shocking 73% decline in average wildlife population sizes globally since 1970. And I believe this government knows how important it is to move rapidly to tackle these crises. And in the context of this bill, I wanted to highlight some of the measures that I've welcomed so far in these first 6 months of government. The establishment of Great British Energy, which will help deliver clean energy and also improve our energy security. The lifting of the 9-year onshore wind ban in just 72 hours of coming to office. The confirmation will ban fracking, and as a proud cooperative and Labour MP, I welcome the commitment to community energy. And this type of leadership isn't new from Labour. We saw under the last government, as the Right Honourable Member referred to, that we led the way in passing the Climate Change Act, establishing a legal requirement for the UK to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And of course, we are here to discuss nature as well. And as climate affects nature, so nature affects climate. And I particularly welcome the water bill, which will help clean up our rivers, lakes and seas. So I want to talk about two aspects. Locally, and forgive me, I know there's many members from Norfolk here, so you might have heard some of this before, but also to then turn globally. So I believe many of these measures will benefit my constituency of Norwich North and the county of Norfolk. And it's vitally important because Norfolk is on the front lines of climate change. As the Norwich Climate Commission has set out, Norfolk is identified as the driest region of England because of climate change, agricultural irrigation demands and population growth. We are also at substantial risk of flooding, which is only exacerbated by climate change. And to compound the challenge, Norfolk has part of the fastest eroding coastline in northwest Europe. A recent report by Norfolk County Council spells out this challenge posed by coastal erosion, including the predictions of possible sea level rises of up to 1.15 metres by the end of the century. And without action, it's estimated, I can't see him in his place today, but in my honourable neighbour's constituency of North Norfolk alone, approximately 1,030 residential and commercial properties could be lost to erosion by 2105. So climate change has a keenly felt impact on our area, as it does across the country and across the world. The nature crisis will also have a hugely detrimental effect. I'm sure many members have visited the Broads. Indeed, I know many people actually have boats there. And it is indeed one of the jewels of our county and of our country, a national park of which we can all be proud, and I am indeed proud that my constituency includes part of it. But recently, the Broads Authority has declared a biodiversity emergency, warning of the need for urgent action to protect wildlife from the impact of climate change and pollution. Indeed, the Broads has been losing species at a rate of 6 per decade in the past 50 years. Vital to addressing this decline is better land and water management and adaptation measures, and I hope the Minister will touch on that in her response. And indeed, I would very much welcome a visit from the Minister to see the Broads for herself. I'm sure she has already visited. So, as you can hear, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have many challenges in Norfolk, but Norfolk is also a key part of the solution. 60% of offshore wind energy in the UK is already generated in the east of England, making it an important centre of clean energy. And there is even more potential in our region that I know this government is serious about maximising, not just in relation to our climate change targets, but also to deliver jobs and growth for our area. I believe there are 640,000 green jobs in the UK, and those are growing at a rate 4 times faster than overall UK employment. So that is a big, exciting opportunity for areas like mine, especially many of the young people. And I know many of them can't actually get jobs or don't feel they've got the skills. So I actually on the last statement, but the need to invest in skills is vitally important. Yeah. As the East of England All-Party Parliamentary Group set out, jobs needed in the low-carbon and renewable energy sector in England by 2050 will be 1.2 million, and 10% of those are expected to be in the East. I also want to reference the huge expertise and knowledge in Norwich, and I recognise how many scientists contributed to the development of this bill. We have the Tyndall Climate Centre with nearly 100 members ranging from PhD researchers to professors. And at the Norwich Research Park, we have many fantastic companies working on this agenda. For example, Alora, who I met recently, they are literally growing rice on the surface of the ocean, helping tackle global hunger. And last year I visited Wendling Beck. You're getting a tour of Norfolk in the Honourable Member for Mid-Norfolk's constituency. It's one of the most ambitious nature recovery projects in England, reversing biodiversity loss locally, inspiring climate action and building a sustainable and resilient landscape legacy. So we need to maximise all of this innovation we have in the UK to deliver on the dual challenge of the nature and climate crises. And my honourable neighbour, who's no longer in his place, unfortunately, he didn't give way to me, but I'll make those points now. We are also home in Norwich to a large financial services sector, including Aviva in his constituency, who is a key leader in sustainability. And we haven't spoken much about the role of business in this agenda and indeed in this bill, but it is vital. And I welcome that the government is already accelerating plans in this area to make us the green finance capital of the world, mandating UK-regulated financial institutions and FTSE 100 companies to develop and implement credible plans that align with the 1.5 goal of the Paris Agreement. My neighbour mentioned airports, and I know there will be much discussion, I'm sure, in future months on this area. I did want to reference Norwich Airport in my constituency, which does provide jobs, but it's also a centre of green aviation excellency. So there are important opportunities in aviation as well to make sure that we are developing the future of it in line with our climate commitments. So I wanted to turn to the international aspect of the biodiversity and climate crisis. As I said before joining this place, I was a campaigner working on a range of issues, including climate change. I was privileged in that role to meet many young activists from around the world who know that this is their future at stake, as well as many people on the front lines of climate change, like Hindu Ibrahim, an environmental activist and leader from Chad, who has championed the indispensable role that Indigenous people and solutions play in this agenda. And I'm sure we could touch on many examples around the world of similar legislation, even if it's not exactly this, where it's really important to draw on that local knowledge. And I hope all of them would be pleased to see cross-party consensus on this issue here in the House and the commitment to bold action, even if we may disagree on some of the specific ways to get there. But I do think this Labour government is restoring British credibility on the world stage, and a huge part of that is on climate change. And that is much needed as we see countries turn away, of course, from the Paris Agreement. It is even more vital that we reaffirm our commitment to these global treaties. And I also welcome the launch of the Global Clean Power Alliance, bringing 12 countries together to turbocharge the rollout of clean energy and drive green jobs and investment at home. And at COP29, the Prime Minister, of course, announced a new climate goal to reduce carbon emissions by 81% by 2035, and importantly called on other countries to match this ambition, because none of us could do this alone. As this debate is particularly focused on the relationship between climate change and biodiversity, Madam Deputy Speaker, it must also be noticed that the UK is resolutely focused on delivering the target to halt and reverse biodiversity loss by 2030, and I welcome commitments such as the 10 million announced for the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund. I just wanted to mention also food and hunger, and that was in fact the last campaign that I worked on. And as WWF has highlighted, the leading driver of habitat loss is a broken food system. So I'd urge the government to also outline what we are doing to tackle this and confirm that we are also committed to tackling food insecurity alongside climate and nature action. Finally, let me turn to public opinion. And I know the bill references citizens' assemblies. As a local councillor before, I did see the benefit of citizens' assemblies. I think there was a question about how you do them locally, nationally, and what is the best mechanism to do that. And whatever happens with this bill, I hope we can continue that important conversation. In Norwich, I know how many people are passionate about tackling climate change. When I've spoken at local schools, this is one of the topics, as I'm sure has been raised with many members here, that children raise with me, because again, this is their future. And we have many local groups, from Friends of the Earth to Norfolk Wildlife Trust. And it does also come up on the doorstep, sometimes positively, sometimes negatively, but it is at least a conversation that we are having. So I know this matters, this government knows it matters, and I know there is widespread public support. But, of course, there is so much more to do, and we do need to move as fast as we can to address these issues. And I know my honourable neighbour for Norwich South spoke about the importance of growth and what does that look like. For me, it is good, sustainable growth, and I do not think it is mutually exclusive from our climate and nature commitments. We can build a million more homes and protect our natural resources and biodiversity, and we can create infrastructure that limits damage to our ecosystems and conserves energy. So I want to be clear that I fully back action to tackle the dual nature and climate crises. I believe the government is also clear in its commitment to doing this, and in the importance of joined-up action and embedding this across government. I welcome the bold plan set out already to make Britain a clean energy superpower, to deliver green growth, to protect our national environment, and to lead internationally. But what I think is now important is that we focus on delivery. And I can see from the debate today, and so many more that we've had in this House, that there are many backbenchers who are ready to hold the government to account on its promises. And whatever happens with this bill, I do hope that we can maintain the cross-party working and spirit of collaboration as we move forward. I'm going to finish also with a quote, not from Margaret Thatcher, but from the UN Secretary-General, who said at the start of this year, "This is climate breakdown in real time. We must exit this road to ruin, and we have no time to lose." I fully agree. And as the Secretary-General also said, we have seen that hope powers change. I believe that hope powered the change we saw in government last July, with many hopeful that we would see a step change on this important agenda. And I am hopeful that we do have a government that is fully committed to tackling climate change and protecting our planet. Thank you.
Shadow Minister Andrew Bowie.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise to speak on this debate on behalf of His Majesty's Official Opposition, and I would like to congratulate first the Honourable Member for South Cotswold for being successful in bringing this private member's bill before the House today. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Conservative and Unionist Party has a record of which we should be incredibly proud when it comes to protecting our environment. We were the first major economy to halve our carbon emissions. We stopped the burning of coal for electricity. We built the first, second, third, fourth and fifth largest offshore wind farms in the world, generating power for the United Kingdom right now. And we introduced the world-leading contracts for difference process, blending together the Conservative principles of competition and enterprise. And has already been referenced by my honourable friend, and he is a friend, it was, of course, Margaret Thatcher who became the leader of our party 50 years ago next month, who famously was the first world leader to raise the issue of climate change on the global stage, warning the United Nations General Assembly in 1989 of the insidious danger climate change posed by the prospect of irretrievable damage to the atmosphere, to the oceans and to Earth itself. And I know honourable right honourable members across the House would agree with me that, as in almost every other case, she was absolutely right. We have seen extreme weather patterns across the globe, indicating the severity of the challenge which faces the world in the 21st century. We must, alongside our global partners, embrace technology, build new nuclear, reduce waste, enhance efficiency, to bring down bills for households, consumers and industry in a way which allows us to protect nature, conserve our landscapes and leave the climate in a better state for generations to come. I'd be delighted to give way.
I thank him for giving way. Of course, he would share the congratulations on the good work with the Labour government before 2010 and also the Liberal Democrats in coalition. And in the spirit of consensus, that's important to recognise. But would he agree with me that one thing that's always missing from this debate about climate is the important point about national security? And if we can get our energy supplies so we are self-sufficient, that is a really important point for our national security. We never talk about this in the context of climate, but as a Conservative, I'm sure he would agree.
I couldn't agree more with the honourable member. In fact, it's quite nice to hear a Liberal Democrat acknowledge that they were actually a part of the government over the last 14 years. They don't always choose to do so. And indeed, on his point on national security and indeed energy security, it is why I am so concerned about the Labour government's plans for our offshore oil and gas industry. Why would you want to rely more on imports, as they will, should they go ahead and accelerate the decline in the North Sea? If we've had this debate, and we will continue to have this debate, I'm sure, as we move forward, if the private member's bill that we debate this morning, however, were to contain measures to ensure a pragmatic and proportionate response to climate change, with households and bill payers at its core, alongside defending our British wildlife, nature and countryside, I'm sure we would all be supportive of its aims and ambitions. I know that colleagues and indeed friends supporting this bill do so with the admirable, indeed laudable intention of seeing the United Kingdom protecting the environment, and it is not this ambition with which we take umbrage. However, it is quite clear that we should not support the damaging measures which this bill would require. This bill, if it became law, would do damage to our country and our prosperity, and to the lives of individuals and indeed industries across this United Kingdom. I'd be delighted to give way.
I thank him for giving way. I wonder where he was when his own member spoke just 15 minutes ago to say this is not an either-or between prosperity and protecting nature and climate.
Well, I was actually sitting right there on the front bench listening to my honourable friend, and indeed I agreed with a lot of what my honourable friend said, but we are here in this place this morning debating the contents of the bill before us, and we have to decide whether or not the contents of that bill is something that we should be supporting. And I'm afraid to break with the consensus that has been expressed across the House this morning, but we cannot. This bill, as I said, would undermine the power of this Parliament and its democratically elected members. It would bind their hands, and it would have, as it says in the bill, the Secretary of State duty-bound to act as directed by an unelected body. A cleaner climate with thriving nature and wildlife is a world we all aspire to. It is the very core belief of conservatism that we should seek to leave the country, the world, in a better place than in which we found it, for our children and our grandchildren. But I'm afraid this bill would not do that. In government, we aspire to be a world leader in the energy sector, embracing new energy mix which reduced our carbon footprint, and we did. We should want to pave the way for other nations, but it should be a path which they would actually want to follow. If this path means green levies, soaring bills, the highest electricity prices in the world, boiler taxes, job losses, rejecting our ability to produce fuel domestically whilst increasing imports from abroad and generating lower tax revenues as a result. Nobody will follow this path.
Would the
this
Minister give way?
Be delighted. The Honourable and then the Honourable Lady.
Sorry. I thank the Shadow Minister for giving way. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Just last week, a report written by the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries who we know are very, by their very nature, cautious people, said that if we continue on our current path, then a plausible worst case is that global GDP will collapse by 50% between 2070 to 2090, and that 4 billion lives could be lost by 2050. It's an unimaginable future. So would the Shadow Minister not agree that the cost of doing nothing is going to be way, way, way more than the cost of acting now?
As I've tried to explain, not just to the Honourable Lady, but to the House, we haven't done nothing. We actually led the world in so many ways, halving emissions faster than any other G7 nation, building at speed some of the biggest renewable offshore wind farms in the world, generating power for the United Kingdom right now, ending the use of coal for electricity production. No other country has a record that comes close to matching the United Kingdom. So it's not a case of doing nothing. It's about doing it in a sensible way that does not impose further bills or further costs on British bill payers. And on that point, I have promised the Honourable Lady I would give way.
Thank you, the Honourable Member. So in Epsom and Newell, we have a company called Sunswap that I visited recently, and they are a pioneering company. They have zero-emission technology for refrigerated transport, which is enabling this transition from polluting diesel to solar power. Does the Honourable Member, Right Honourable Member, not agree with me that innovation like this thrives in times of challenge and really does drive economic growth?
Absolutely, and that's one of the reasons I'm so proud of the Contracts for Difference scheme, which over our time in government supported emerging and developing technologies to ensure we get the transition right to the tune of billions of pounds. Can I turn to the... I will give way and then I'll make some progress.
I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Member for giving way. He spoke of the need to focus on the provisions of this bill. I wonder if he could outline which provisions he is opposed to. Is it net zero ambitions, increasing net biodiversity, or developing a nature and biodiversity plan?
Well, if the Honourable Gentleman would just have some patience, I'm about to turn to the exact provisions in this bill that we do take issue with. The bill states that it is to require the United Kingdom to achieve climate and nature targets. This bill calls for an immediate end to the exploration, extraction and, crucially, import of fossil fuels, not only laying off hundreds of thousands of workers and undermining our energy security, but shutting down our chemicals industry and putting at risk our ability to keep the lights on. This bill imposes a duty upon the Secretary of State to publish annual targets, which they will then be bound to take all reasonable steps to achieve. As we have seen, setting arbitrary, legally binding targets with no plan to how to achieve them is a mistake. This bill would also establish a Climate and Nature Assembly to direct the Secretary of State's strategy, a body which the Secretary of State would be legally bound to follow if any of the measures it proposed had the support of 66% of its members. Those members would be unelected and unaccountable, unlike members in this House. This is not how decisions are made in this country. It's not how decisions should be made in this country. Laws and decisions are taken in this country by this Parliament. They are introduced mostly by the government, which commands a majority in this House. That government is held to account in this House by us as elected members, and we in turn are held to account by our constituents. We cannot outsource our responsibilities to an unelected, unaccountable and remote institution. In Section 1, the bill... I'd be delighted.
The Honourable Member agree with me that he talks about unelected, unaccountable organisations such as the Assembly. Is that not also the case for the other place?
Well, I didn't know it was official Labour Party policy, and if it is, please correct me, to dissolve the other place in its entirety. If it is, I'd be keen to be educated in that regard. But no, it is not the case. As he knows, the governing party in the upper house is determined by which party has won the democratic election and commands a majority in this House, and that is a system that has worked and will continue to, I believe, work well for many, many years to come. Turning to Section 1. In Section... Yes, of course.
Would he agree with me that one of the organisations which fits his description is the Climate Change Committee? And that committee is charged with various responsibilities, but it has neglected its responsibility to promote adaptation and resilience.
I would agree in part with my honourable friend that indeed it has neglected some of its responsibilities, but I do want to make some progress in regard of this bill today, which does not address the Climate Change Committee. In Section 1, this bill imposes a duty upon the Secretary of State that they must achieve the climate and nature objectives that it sets out, as if mere will alone could bring these objectives into reality. Those objectives are that the UK reduces its overall contribution to global greenhouse gas emissions to net zero at a rate consistent with achieving its nationally determined contribution emissions reduction targets in accordance with the Paris Agreement of 2015. This would entail reducing UK emissions in line with the 1.5-degree objective. In Section 2, the bill explains that the strategy which the Secretary of State would be duty-bound to produce and then take every possible step to achieve must include measures that will achieve the object specified by limiting the UK's total emissions of carbon dioxide, including territorial emissions, to levels in line with the Paris Agreement's 1.5-degree objective. What does this mean? The bill stops short of providing year-on-year limits for overall emissions, but it does not indicate that our current carbon budget system is not sufficient for the objectives of this bill. 0 Hour, the climate campaign group behind this bill, thinks that the UK's carbon budgets are no longer sufficient to achieve 1.5 degrees. And once we include emissions from the goods we import, the UK's total carbon footprint will exceed its share of global carbon budget for a 67% chance of 1.5 degree by more than a factor of 2. Now, if we... I will not, because I've given way a few times. I do know there are other members that want to speak, and I want to make some progress. Aligning to these targets, which this bill would oblige the Secretary of State to achieve, would require even more drastic action to reduce emissions. The Secretary of State has already signed the country up to an even stricter target of cutting emissions by 81% by 2035, something which the Climate Change Committee has said will require people to eat less meat and dairy, take fewer flights, swap their boilers for heat pumps and their petrol cars for electric vehicles at a pace that will require taxes and mandation. This is not sensible, nor is it feasible. Let us turn now to the objective to include import emissions in the scope of our carbon budgets. 0 Hour correctly identifies that the current carbon budget system focuses on territorial emissions rather than consumption emissions. In other words, we count the carbon emissions of what is produced within our own borders rather than the carbon emissions of the products which are produced overseas, shipped in and then used within the UK. Some may think this underplays our true contribution to global emissions, and they may have a point, because if we shut down our oil and gas sector, for example, as the party opposite seemingly wants to do, then that doesn't mean we consume any less oil or gas. It just means that we ship it in as LNG from overseas, which has 4 times the carbon emissions in the production process. Yes, we may have reduced our territorial carbon emissions and stuck to our carbon budgets, but we'd be actually increasing our carbon emissions overall. This, as my right honourable friend, the member for East Surrey, likes to say, is carbon accounting gone mad. Yes.
I thank the Minister for giving way very suddenly. Does the Minister recognise that the very point that he is making now about the fact that emissions from imports are not counted does rather undermine the point he was making earlier, boasting about the territorial emissions that had been reduced during his government, and in fact that may be the very point that the co-proposers of the bill are trying to make?
Yes, but how do you get away? I thank the honourable lady for her contribution and her question. But how do you get away from then the problem of double accounting for those emissions? If, for example, India are counting them as part of their global emissions, then we start to count them as well, in addition to what we are doing within our borders, how will we ever get an accurate picture as to the emissions across the globe and what they actually are? If we were to take into consideration the global effect of our consumption emissions and the carbon footprint of what we import, the British people would soon realise there is no way to decarbonise consumption as rapidly as possible, as this bill would like to do, without huge economic challenge. And that is not recognised in this bill. That brings me to the next aspect of the bill, the requirement, not just the ambition, but the requirement that the UK ends the exploration, extraction, export and import of fossil fuels as rapidly as possible. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm sorry to say this is not a serious proposal. Even the Climate Change Committee have said that oil and gas will remain a crucial part of our energy mix for decades to come, something that the Secretary of State and his ministers have indeed accepted. As we have been saying, turning off the taps in the North Sea will only result in higher imports, something that the Labour government seemingly accepts. But even worse, this bill would require that we not only completely end domestic exploration and production, but they also end the import of fossil fuels. Madam Deputy Speaker, just this week, on Wednesday, gas power stations provided 65% of the UK's electricity. Just 2% came from wind power and 1% came from solar. If this bill were successful, and we ended not just the extraction, but the import of all fossil fuels as rapidly as possible, then MPs who are backing this bill will have to explain how we keep the lights on. When the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't I will make progress because I know there's more members to speak. When the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, we simply do not have the technology available now, enough clean power through batteries or long-duration electricity storage to meet demand. And this also speaks to the major contradiction in the bill, which speaks about protecting the British countryside from development, but then also would require an incredible rollout at pace and at scale unprecedented of renewable technologies, pylon substations and battery storage facilities. Yes, I would be delighted to give way, and then I will give way.
Thank you. Does the honourable member agree, the right honourable member, agree that the investment and setting up of GB Energy, which I believe the location of that was not far from his own constituency, is going to lead in ensuring that transition to clean, green energy generation will happen quickly, and that the failure to invest was on their watch?
Well, she's drawing me into setting out what a great record the Conservative government has when it comes to investment in new technologies. I would love to believe that Great British Energy will, in fact, have a positive difference on the direction that this country is taking in as far as investing in new technologies, creating new jobs, and driving the transition. But we have seen no evidence that that will actually be the case. Indeed, every time we ask the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero what they expect GB Energy to actually do, they singularly fail to be able to come up with a response. And far from GB Energy being welcomed in Aberdeen in the northeast of Scotland, it is that part of the country which is being decimated more than any other by her party's position when it comes to oil and gas and our industry in the North Sea. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way. Will the right honourable gentleman reflect upon the words "as rapidly as possible"? Because it is this language and it is the measures and the pressures that are included in this bill will give the incentives for British industry, for the great British minds, the inventors, the researchers, the developers, to create the technologies, to produce them at scale, to resolve the issues that the honourable member for one of the Dorset constituencies, I think, North Dorset, spoke about earlier, to resolve these bottlenecks that mean we do not produce, we only assemble. That language in there. Does the honourable member agree, right honourable member agree, that the very wording of the bill is deliberate to spur that innovation and take advantage of the opportunities?
Yeah. My problem, as it stands right now, is that the current government's position on oil and gas and their position when it comes to the support of our domestic industry in the UK is actually having a detrimental impact, because the advancements into technologies that he speaks about are actually being developed by the very companies involved in that extraction in the North Sea right now. Of course, everybody believes we need to invest in transition, and indeed many say we should be speeding that transition up. The accelerated decline of the North Sea basin will actually see a lot of that skilled workforce and investment leave the United Kingdom and go overseas. That's something that I'm incredibly worried about. I have much here on the Conservatives' record when it comes to the Environment Act, the 25-year environmental strategy, the creation of new national parks, 34 new landscape recovery projects and 13 offshore marine protected areas. I'll take me one last time.
Okay, just a very short question. Could he number the number of onshore wind installations that were put together in the last Tory government? Thank you.
Well, we in this side of the House believe that we should not ride roughshod over the views of communities up and down this country, why we were so reluctant to develop onshore wind at the scale that the Labour Party would seek to. And indeed, that goes back to the... yes, of course I would give way to my honourable.
I'm grateful for the honourable member giving way, but if you look at the wording of Section 2, where energy projects over 100 megawatts there'd be a presumption against them unless there was community agreement. It sounds to me, Madam Deputy Speaker, like this bill reimposes the community ban that the previous Conservative government had. Well, yes, but and I would never seek to argue with my honourable friend, but actually it does not.
because actually what this bill does is set a limit at 100 megawatts, which even the largest solar farm doesn't quite reach. So there would still be a presumption in favour of large solar park developments. Shotwick Solar Park on the Welsh border, for example, is the largest in the country, and it's at 72.2 megawatts. So it would still automatically be approved, which goes to, again, to the contradiction at the heart of this bill. You cannot say that you want to protect farmland and protect great British countryside and then seek to see approved large-scale renewable projects at pace across the country, which would do the exact opposite. Yes, of course.
Grateful to my old friend for giving way. It's actually slightly worse than that, because we heard the debate earlier about the word and when it comes to nature, a lot of these large-scale renewable energy projects, such as battery storage, are surrounded by such severe fencing that severely disrupts and destroys local nature, such as deer runs.
Well, my honourable friend knows that on this I am in complete agreement, having, as I do, a significant amount of renewable energy projects, battery storage facilities, substations and pylons proposed for my constituency as a result of the plans being brought forward by this government. He is, as ever, absolutely right. We cannot obviously support this bill. This bill would see jobs lost abroad. It would see decisions taken out of the hands of democratically elected politicians and placed into the hands of judicial activists and vague, unaccountable bodies. However, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am sorry to say it's the lack of seriousness and the inconsistencies, as I've just said, in this bill, a lack of understanding of government works, the ignorance of energy markets, of how an increasing reliance on imports is bad for us, not just economically, but also environmentally, that means we cannot afford it. This bill would do great harm to British industry, undermine parliamentary democracy, consign future governments to goals which are not just unachievable, but would be achieved on account of how devastating it would be for our energy, food, national and economic security, and it would not protect the great British countryside. And that, despite the laudable and admirable aims of many of my honourable and right honourable friends who support this, is why we cannot support this bill.
Josh Newbury.
Thank you very much. It's an honour to have the opportunity to speak on this bill, given that the twin challenges of tackling climate change and ensuring our natural world not only survives, but becomes a far greater part of our lives. And those are priorities that I know are shared by the vast majority of my constituents in Cannock Chase, many of whom have written to me over the last few weeks. As others have done, I'd like to start by paying tribute to the Honourable Member for the South Cotswolds, who deserves great credit for using her private member's bill to push for strong ambitions and action on both climate and biodiversity. That decision has enabled a huge amount of discussion to take place on these issues, not just today, but over the last few months, and no doubt in the months and years to come. In particular, she's worked incredibly hard to make sure these discussions radiate out of this place, by engaging with passionate campaigners from up and down the country, and I've no doubt that will ensure that the public debate is both wider and deeper, something that I'm confident everybody here today would welcome. As I noted in my maiden speech, my constituency is best known for its forest, and whilst there's far more to Cannock Chase and the fantastic people who call it home than that, for the purpose of this debate, I'm happy to have a welcome excuse to focus on the natural beauty and serenity that it has to offer. The truth is that Cannock Chase is a far more complex and diverse range of habitats than simply a 2,700-hectare forest. Indeed, around a third of the wider Cannock Chase national landscape is agricultural land, something I'll come on to a little later, and a large proportion is heathland, a vital but endangered habitat. In many ways, the decline and continuing plight of Britain's heathland is symbolic of the decline of our natural world, which we're discussing today and which the bill quite rightly seeks to address and reverse. It's often said that Britain is one of the most nature-deprived countries in the world, but for us in Cannock Chase, that can at times be hard to believe because of all the natural beauty we have right on our doorstep. Indeed, no one living in my constituency is more than a 15-minute drive from our stunning forest and heathland. Having said that, inequality and poor bus services mean that the most deprived parts of my constituency are also the most nature-deprived, an intersection which I hope we'll bear in mind as we continue this debate. When I knock on doors on new build estates in Cannock Chase, such as those in Hensford, which is often described as the gateway to the Chase, people who've recently moved to the area often tell me that having nature a stone's throw away is what drew them to our communities, particularly if they grew up in an urban area. The Chase also attracts a huge number of visitors, around 2.5 million a year, which, if you can believe it, means that the density of visitors we receive is 4 to 5 times greater than that of the Lake District National Park. That intensity of tourism shows how passionate we are about nature and our instinctive need to get lost in it, but also that we can sometimes pose the greatest risk to the natural world. In my area, it's sometimes said that we are at risk of loving the chase to death. So the agenda of this bill and this government to prevent outcomes like that is so important. As I mentioned, no habitat in my constituency illustrates this better than lowland heathland. Rarer than tropical rainforest, lowland heath is found in Brinley Heath and Moors Gorse, just north of Hensford, and at the Iron Age hill fort of Castle Ring in Cannock Wood. As well as being a scheduled ancient monument, Castle Ring is home to a variety of other rare habitats like sphagnum bog and acidic grassland. The UK is fortunate to have a fifth of all the heathland in Europe, yet sadly we've lost 80% of it over the last 2 centuries. But what's particularly concerning is that much of that loss has occurred over the last 70 years, echoing the picture of ever-increasing species and habitat loss that other members have drawn attention to today, including my honourable friend, member for Norwich North. I know from taking my daughter to see the stunning carpets of purple heather over the Chase every August that the cutbacks to conservation work due to austerity are allowing scrub and ferns to creep in more and more year after year. This is why I was delighted that just before Christmas, to mark the 75th anniversary of our national parks and the Access to the Countryside Act, the Environment Secretary announced that the national landscapes, like Cannock Chase, will be granted new powers to boost nature's recovery and improve sustainable access to these beautiful landscapes. Refining the role and authority of national parks and national landscapes will benefit our rural economy and mean more people can enjoy spending time reconnecting with nature. It's also fantastic to see stronger regulations which will make sure public bodies, including water companies, do more to respect and support these precious landscapes. I'm confident this ambition will also be extended to the protection of sites of special scientific interest, of which we have many in Cannock Chase. Often SSIs are under greater ecological threat than national parks or landscapes because they're often more dispersed or designated for a particular species. For example, the Cannock Extension Canal in my home village of Norton Keynes plays host to one of the country's largest populations of floating water plantain, which I have to admit isn't particularly special to look at, but it is nonetheless an ecologically important endangered plant which thrives in gently undulating waters like canals. As I mentioned, farming is absolutely present in the Cannock Chase national landscape, and in my view, there's nowhere better than national parks and national landscapes to see that farmers are stewards of the land and keen to work in harmony with nature. As we know, support must be in place to enable farmers to realise this ambition, which is why I very much welcome the government's announcement of £5 billion over the next 2 years through the New Deal for Farmers, which will help to ensure natural recovery is taking place on every English farm alongside sustainable food production. To the credit of the previous government, they introduced the Farming in Protected Landscapes programme. Forex Farm, near to Slittingbill in my constituency, was one of the recipients of the funding, but it was a very time-limited programme, so I hope it will be renewed beyond the next financial year. Alongside many members of this House, particularly my fellow members of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee, I look forward to continuing work on finding a way forward to a financially and environmentally sustainable future for British farming. For protected landscapes like Cannock Chase, funding streams such as the higher tier of the Countryside Stewardship Scheme will be vital. These bespoke, delicately balanced projects need the expertise of government agencies like Natural England, and while significant progress has been made in recent months on expanding capacity and speeding up decisions, we still have a long way to go to make sure all farmers can access the environmental land management schemes and improve sustainability and biodiversity in the best way for their farm. Madam Deputy Speaker. Yes, of course.
Thank the member for giving way, and I compliment him on his speech. Would he also agree with me that biodiverse farming and biodiverse areas near high production farms are not the enemy of good quality food production? They in fact enhance that production and reduce the need for chemical and herbicide use on our land.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the right honourable member for his intervention. I completely agree that we need to make sure that our farms are properly supported and that we highlight best practice as well to make sure that that is spread across the country and that we're seeing sustainable food production, national self-sufficiency go hand in hand with that work and encourage farmers, enable them to be stewards of land, which we know they absolutely are. Yes, of course.
I'm grateful for the honourable gentleman. I do draw attention to my register of interest in relation to farming. Whilst I'm very supportive of regenerative agricultural techniques, does the honourable member accept that yield, I'm afraid, does decrease by about a third, 25% to a third, when you use regenerative agricultural techniques? That is suitable in some areas, but not in all.
Yes, I thank the honourable member for that intervention. This is why I mentioned, as part of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee, we've got an inquiry ongoing on the future of farming, and this is something that we're very much looking at. I think we're really keen to look into that balance between the two and to make sure we strike the proper balance. But I think, as I said, the underlying principle has to be that we empower farmers to do what is right for their farm, and that they enable them to make that judgment on the correct balance. Madam Deputy Speaker, the fact that water quality has been a feature of this debate is also very welcome. We talk about the state of our rivers, lakes and seas a lot in this House, but in my view, there can't be too much discussion about it. As I'm sure is sadly the case in every constituency, in Cannock Chase we have waterways which are rated poor for quality, the River Trent on the edge of Rugeley and the Rising Brook. In 2022, untreated sewage was discharged into watercourses in my constituency 254 times for a total of 372 hours, disgracefully typical in this country today. And we know that has consequences for wildlife. When I met the Staffordshire Wildlife Trust in May last year, they highlighted to me that in just 2 decades, the water vole has completely disappeared from Cannock Chase, and there's been a 96% decline in records of grey partridge. Just 2 species, which paint a very grim picture indeed. A key ask from the Wildlife Trust, of which I'm a proud member, was for Labour to commit to the 30 by 30 pledge to protect 30% of land and sea for nature by 2030, something I'm proud to say this government has committed to, and unlike the last government, is putting into action. Through the Water Special Measures Bill, the government is ensuring water companies will be held to account for the improvements that are being promised in exchange for hefty bill increases, whilst also empowering customers who for far too long have witnessed the decline in the health of our waterways but been unable to directly challenge it. Now, I've spoken a lot about nature, Madam Deputy Speaker, but in Cannock Chase we also have a story to tell on energy. In my maiden speech, I explained that the closure of the coal-fired Rugeley power station had a huge impact on the communities I represent, but that a new community on the now cleared site would ensure energy-efficient homes and new infrastructure marks a new era for Rugeley and Brereton. There are plans to make sure the power station's energy legacy is maintained too, with a battery electric storage facility and, I hope, rooftop solar. On very few sites in the country will there be such a clear transition from the energy sources of the past to the homes, jobs and technologies of the future. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll turn to the principles of this bill. When it comes to the climate and nature crisis, holding people in positions of power to account is perhaps more important than ever. Knitting together work across government into a coherent strategy will be essential to making sure the targets in the Environment Act become a reality, something this government has made an unwavering commitment to. We all know that we don't have time to waste in the battle to limit global temperature rises and avoid the most catastrophic effects of climate change, or the battle to halt and reverse nature loss. The last government talked the talk to some extent, but dithered and delayed so chronically that they didn't end up actually implementing much. As with the last Labour government, this Labour government has set a world-leading agenda on climate and nature. As some countries backslide on international commitments, this government stands firm in asserting the importance of sticking to our targets and making meaningful progress towards meeting them. Whether it's increasing woodland cover and seeing the return of water voles in constituencies like mine, or stopping islands sinking into the sea on the other side of the world, this government will always make our climate and natural world its priority. And on behalf of the people I represent, so will I.
Carla.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last week, the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero and I were both invited to see a play called Kyoto about the international climate negotiations. It looks like some other ministers may have been there as well who I didn't spot. The play told the story of the international climate negotiations in Kyoto, including the pivotal role that the late, great John Prescott played in working collaboratively, forging a binding agreement between countries with vastly different politics who agreed about very little. I found the play so moving and inspiring, and I thought I saw that the Secretary of State did too. So the next morning I wrote to him asking if he'd be willing to have a call with me about this bill and about how we might be able to work together. I did this because this crisis is too big, too existential to leave to a party machinery whose prime motivation, it seems, is just to be seen to win, as we've seen reported in the news yesterday. This bill was first tabled by the first Green MP, Caroline Lucas, 4 years ago. It is and always has been a chance for collaborative cross-party endeavour. It is supported by many of the government's backbenchers, and the Labour Party itself pledged agreement with the principles of the bill not long ago. If the government supported this bill today, it would share in the credit of its success. We all win if this bill goes to committee and emerges as strong as possible, supported across the House. Well, I understand the member for South Cotswolds has agreed not to push it to a vote today. In exchange, it seems, for just a meeting with the Secretary of State for Energy and Net Zero and a video, with an agreement to work together but with no specific commitments. That's her decision.
Start with consensus.
Let me continue, please. That's her decision. I'm sad about it, but I wish her well, and I hope it works out. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I cannot tell you how disappointed I am, how disappointed millions of people will be to learn how the government has behaved. They ignored the Can Bill campaign for months, only finally agreeing to meet the lead proposer 10 days before this debate, coming to the negotiation table with almost nothing new, demanding a promise not to push it to a vote in exchange for no regulation, no legislation, no new targets. Peanuts. 10 days of negotiation, and incredibly, the offers got worse. Until late last night, the best the government could offer was a meeting and a non-specific offer to work together and a video with the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero. No. The climate is why I got into politics. I am not giving up that easily. So I've stood up today to say to the government, please give us real commitments, binding decisions, legislation, timetables and consequences. Because the existing legislation the government is working to is based on science that is out of date. Back when we thought 2 degrees C was a safe level of warming. The legislation makes no account of the emissions from products and services we import. It makes no account of emissions from aviation and shipping. It makes no account of emissions from other greenhouse gases, like methane. In other words, it chooses not to count the tricky stuff and then slaps itself on the back for doing so jolly well at the easy stuff. And it does not, as we have heard over and over again in this chamber today, join up climate and nature legislation policy in any way. So to the government I say, please, please, commit to real, binding, bold legislation that reflects how the science has evolved since the 2008 Climate Change Act, which was groundbreaking in its day, but which is now superseded by the climate science. If they won't, as one of the bill's co-proposers, I will take this to a vote. If they really think they can look their constituents and their children in the eye, I would like to finish this point, if that's okay. If the government think that they can look their constituents and their children in the eye and say, look, we couldn't help it, there was party politics, I had to think of my career, please go ahead.
I thank the Honourable Member for that, and I think I also was at the film Kyoto, and I've spent 20 years attending all of the climate negotiations, and given that she has spoken about cross-party consensus and the need to build the political momentum to get forward, would the Honourable Member show respect to the huge efforts made by my honourable friends here, where she did receive commitments which will enable us to move forward, not at the pace we want, but together. And I'm very, very worried about the way in which she is undermining the efforts that have been made to take this forward.
I thank the member for her intervention. I do have a huge amount of respect for the member for South Cotswolds, who has worked incredibly hard over the years, decades, as an environmental campaigner, and months since she first put forward this bill. I want to make some progress for now, thank you. I respect the member's choice, although I disagree with it and I'm sad about it, and I note that this bill is a cross-party bill that has been going for 4 years and has had cross-party support throughout, and it is the position of the lead proposer on this current iteration of the bill to accept a negotiation without specific promises. My position is that a stronger negotiation and getting this bill to committee is how we will get. I will make some progress now. Thank you. I anticipate I will be answering many of the points you want to make, so I'd like to make a little progress. Thank you. Look, even I don't love every clause in the revised version of this bill. I would prefer the bill's climate target made explicit reference to the 1.5-degree limit and the UK's fair contribution towards it. And I very strongly agree with the last-minute insertion of a presumption against large renewable projects, which was made without consulting with the other co-proposers. But the fundamental principles of this bill are sound. Laws based on the science, tackling climate and nature as one, and doing things with people, not to people. And it has the level of ambition that the science demands. It contains enough positive measures for me to give it my full support today, putting aside my differences about those points. At the Assisted Dying Bill, second reading, we heard powerful arguments about how it could be improved. But the House voted for it to progress because there was an agreement that it warranted further scrutiny, including, potentially, amendments. The same applies here today. If members agree with the principles but want to change some specifics, sure, let's debate that. In which case, please don't block this bill today. Join me in voting for a second reading. Then let's debate about how to make it better, together, cross-party. Set aside party allegiances for a moment. We can show bold leadership together. I'm on my final sentence, if you'll let me. Set aside party allegiances for a moment. Show bold leadership. I will give way, thank you.
I thank the honourable member for giving way, and I admire her passion and her commitment to the cause. I'm afraid I was not in the chamber to hear the beginning of her speech, but from what I've been able to gather, I would just like to take this opportunity to set the record straight. I very much believe that we do need to have cross-party consensus with this. So I have been willing and, in fact, eager to have conversations with the government on this. I have been an environmental campaigner for the last 20 years. I have tried the placard waving. I have marched in the streets. That absolutely has an important role to play. But there is a reason that I chose to come to this place, and that is to take the policy approach. And as a third party, the only way we can do that is by working with government.
Yeah. Thank you. With the greatest of respect to the honourable member for South Cotswolds, taking a bill with binding legislation to committee stage for line-by-line scrutiny is not placard waving. That's not what she said. Voting for this bill today is voting for a livable future. I hope that's what we all will choose.
Nadia Whittome, Mr. Ofer. Nadia Whittome.
Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, the climate and nature crises are the defining test of our era, and therefore our government. As one of the co-sponsors of this bill, who has co-sponsored it in previous iterations when Caroline Lucas, the former member for Brighton Pavilion, first brought it to the House, I've seen throughout my time here the importance of working cross-party on this. That doesn't mean we agree on everything. It doesn't mean that the opposition or members from opposition parties and indeed Labour backbenchers cannot forcefully hold our government to account. But it does mean that we need to be prioritising what materially is best for the climate and nature emergency. I have and will continue to call my party out when it's not going far enough, where it's getting things wrong even. But what I will also do is fight tooth and nail for transitional demands in pursuit of tackling the climate and ecological emergency. And to be honest, like, this bill is not, and I know that my honourable friend, the member for South Cotswolds, will say this herself, that this bill is not the ceiling of what we want to achieve, it's the floor. She said herself in her opening speech that this isn't a silver bullet. But what we're doing now is working towards getting the concessions from the government that they've already committed to, holding them accountable, pushing them to go further, and then taking it up to and beyond what this bill is asking for. So I don't want to sacrifice the transitional demands that we have won as a result of pressure and negotiation, not just from MPs. In fact, I think we perhaps have played the smallest role in that, but from campaigners who have been pushing us to push ministers and push the government. And I'm not willing to sacrifice those transitional demands that we could win for climate and nature today, right now, and hold the government to, in order to have a vote that would mean that we lose those. Because I care about the material. That's why I'm in Parliament. Yes.
Thank the honourable member very much for giving way. Given that we have strong cross-party consensus as expressed today on the urgency of tackling the climate and nature crisis, I don't really understand her argument that the government would somehow draw back from measures that it's committed in negotiation with the honourable member for South Cotswold to take forward, just because there are a number of us in this House that think it's important to vote on a bill that will help move us further and faster to tackling the climate and nature crisis. As my honourable colleague explained, taking it to second reading is an opportunity to further discuss and build that cross-party consensus on exactly the measures needed. Will she explain why a vote for this bill is not a good idea?
Speaking list, Nadia Whittome. I thank her for her intervention, and I have every respect for the honourable member and for her Green Party colleagues. I'm not here to answer on behalf of the government. I'm here to hold the government to account. That is what I will be doing. I'm also here to win material change on climate justice, economic justice, social justice, and that will be what drives my strategy. With Trump's election in the US, his government of billionaires, for billionaires, and his frenzied pursuit of fossil fuels, it's more important now than ever that we do not pander to his climate denialism, that the UK plays a leading role mitigating the climate crisis, restoring nature and adapting to the impacts that these emergencies are causing. Our lives, especially the lives of younger generations, will be blighted by these twin crises. In recent months, we've seen fires raging through California, storm after storm batter the UK, and devastating flooding from Thailand to Spain. If this is now, Madam Deputy Speaker, imagine the extreme weather events we could be seeing in 20, 40 or 60 years. Earlier this month, the UN Secretary-General reiterated, and I quote, that global emissions must peak this year and rapidly decline thereafter if we are to have a sliver of hope of limiting long-term global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. I welcome the positive and vital steps that our government has already taken on environmental issues in its first 6 months, on homegrown clean power, on stopping new fossil fuel projects, on cleaning up our filthy rivers, on reviving public transport, on retrofitting homes. But we all recognise, and I'm sure ministers themselves recognise, that we must go further still. And that is what the measures contained in this bill are all about, ensuring that we reduce carbon emissions at the speed and scale that is required, and that we take the steps necessary to fight the climate and nature emergency, intertwined crises that cannot be tackled in silo. The campaign behind the Climate and Nature Bill has been phenomenal, and I'm very proud to have played a very small part as one of its co-sponsors, and to have been a co-sponsor, as I mentioned, of its previous iteration, the Climate and Ecology Bill. I want to thank the Zero Hour campaign and the thousands of people who have pushed for this bill over many, many years, from climate scientists to academics to medical professionals and every other person who has raised their voice for the future of the planet, including many in Nottingham East. It is because of you, those of you in the public gallery and outside, that this bill has been backed by around 200 MPs, including 90 of us on the government benches. And I must also thank those who have sponsored this bill in its previous versions in this House. My honourable friends, the members for Sheffield Hallam and for Leeds Central and Headingley, the former member, my right honourable friend, Caroline Lucas, and most recently, of course, the honourable member for South Cotswolds. She has worked tirelessly to get us to this point, to push for the measures in this bill and to engage with the government. And it's thanks to her hard work that we have won commitments from the government on which all co-sponsors, particularly those on the Labour benches, will be holding it to account. To be clear, as I've said already, these are not the sum total of what the climate and nature crises require of us. There is so much further for us to go, but I am hopeful that today will be the beginning, or rather the continuation, of a journey that sees our government work with can-bill campaigners to take the action that we need. Because it's said again and again, Madam Deputy Speaker, that politics is about choices. There is no more important choice than our very future. We have to choose to serve the interests of people here in the UK and right across the globe, and stand up to the wealthy and powerful, determined to enrich themselves at the expense of people and our planet.
Should not need to be reminded that speeches should be directed towards the chair and most definitely not to the gallery. And I call Andrew George.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to support my honourable friend in the excellent work that she's been doing in supporting this, in advancing this bill. And indeed, I've been for many years supporting it in its previous iterations as a in local authority in Cornwall. I have to say, I had a speech prepared to encourage the government to support this bill, and I've listened to what my honourable friend said in relation to the importance of advancing the essence of what this bill is about. And since then, we've heard from the Green Party, and I worry now that we are in the process or at risk of playing politics with an important matter which I believe what's most important now is that we bring parties together in a shared agenda and find a way forward rather than generate divisiveness at this stage. I'll give way.
Thank the honourable member for giving way. I wonder if he agrees with me. We've heard extensively today, Madam Deputy Speaker, about the importance of cross-party consensus, and I believe we've been having a fantastic discussion to that end. I wonder if the honourable member agrees with me that in the name of cross-party consensus we should be working together and not just party political grandstanding in favour of the Green Party.
Yes, of course I agree, and I'm a strong supporter of this bill and want to see this bill, and certainly the intent of this bill to go forward as rapidly as possible, and for us to be making progress in all of the areas which have been which have been advanced in the bill itself. I mean, not just those in terms of challenging and making sure that we not only meet the commitments which successive governments have made in relation to our climate targets, but also that we ensure that that is achieved on a and, if you like, reviewed on indeed a regular basis. Similarly, successive governments, to be fair, as the Honourable Member for Dorset South has made very, very clear, that the Conservatives have got a very good, North, I beg your pardon, have made important advances in relation to nature conservation from the Wildlife and Countryside Act in the mid-80s and since then. And I don't think it's right or proper to besmirch any particular party for having failed in this area. Yes, we may well have arguments, but what we want to try and do is to bring together a political consensus to ensure that we can take these matters forward. In relation to nature, we're facing a very significant crisis at the moment. I mean, I don't claim to be an expert myself. I do, for example, I've been a lifelong member of the Cornwall Wildlife Trust and support all of its works. I've been supporting a number of projects within my own constituency, and indeed, for example, volunteer as undertaking a butterfly transect in my own locality during the summer months, tracking the decline of butterflies. And you may say, well, butterflies, what's the relevance of that? Well, they're the model, if you like, organism to study the fragmentation, habitat loss, and climate change in this country, and actually the weather vane for how we are doing as a nation, and the result, I have to say, is extremely worrying indeed. I don't claim to be I'm more of a bag carrier and scribe for my wife as far as the transect is concerned, but it certainly is an educative process and something for which helps, and I would encourage all honourable members to similarly undertake volunteer acts within their own constituencies to track and monitor what is going on with our wildlife. For example, although the particular area in the Hale Towns where this is taking place is a particular hotspot for the silver-studded blue, and we're tracking the decline of the silver-studded blue in this particular locality. In the last 14 years, the common blue has seen a 51% decline. There's been a 65% decline in the green-veined white, and we're talking nationwide. The small tortoiseshell has seen a 59% decline, the painted lady 81% decline. There's been very significant declines across all species within these periods, and these certainly need to be looked at and considered. And when one looks at, for example, the state of bird life in this country, within that locality, we observe migratory birds coming into the coast and the shorelines of West Cornwall. One that I track and have particular interest in is for example, the Arctic tern, which remarkably migrates. I mean, one would want to advise them not to, but 25,000 miles from south to North Pole, in effect, or from the Antarctic to the Arctic, and stop over on our shores. I mean, it's such an enormous privilege to have such remarkable creatures sort of stopping by. I've witnessed, and this isn't through ignorance or malevolence, it isn't through malevolence, that we see that a bit like my honourable friend rowing across the ocean, that as they arrive, they're met with dog walkers who disturb them and cause them inability to be able to feed and rest at the very time that they most need to. And what we need in this country, and what I believe that we need to advance through both legislation and education, which is what I think is vitally important. So I don't think there's an intent and malevolence on the part of those walkers who take their dogs to the coast and disturb wildlife in that manner. But I think that what needs to happen is that we need to engage with the public, and I think it's through legislation like this that it gives us the opportunity to both engage and regulate in a manner which actually brings, I hope, the public with us in order to protect wildlife. But what I would simply say in closing, you'll be pleased to know, to give others opportunity to speak, is that I do hope that the Green Party, before they decide to press this to a vote, will actually talk to my honourable friend a little more and ensure that we actually bring this House together today so that the purpose of this legislation can be advanced, which I think is the most important of all. Thank you.
Collinge.
Thank you, Speaker, and I would like to thank the Honourable Member for South Cotswolds for bringing this important debate. I really admire her commitment to action, to real progress, not grandstanding, because politics is not a game. Politics is real life, and outcomes matter. As a Member of Parliament for Morecambe and Lunesdale, I want to highlight how the urgent challenges of climate change and the nature emergency affect my constituency, a place of natural beauty and ecological importance. My constituency is also well placed to be part of the solution to the climate and nature emergencies, particularly when it comes to clean energy generation and stewardship of the land. Morecambe and Lunesdale is especially vulnerable to climate change. Much of the urban area of Morecambe and Heysham are low-lying, making them prone to future flooding. Villages such as Houlton have already seen the devastation caused by extreme weather, and today I'm holding my breath as to whether I get home today. I doubt I will, and also what damage Storm Iowyn might wreak on my constituency. My constituency is home to farmers whose livelihoods are dependent on the weather. My farms are mainly dairy and livestock, with flooding and extreme weather not only risking business damage but also animal welfare. The rural areas of my constituency, with land stewarded for generations by our farmers, are exemplars of natural beauty, with both rolling hills and dramatic limestone eruptions. In my constituency, we have the national landscape of Arnside and Silverdale, and a section of the Yorkshire Dales National Park, with the market town of Sedgwick being the Dales' most populous settlement. That's its claim to fame. My constituency is also home to Morecambe Bay, a site of extraordinary natural heritage. Its mudflats, salt marshes and sandbanks support a wide range of wildlife and is a double site of special scientific interest. Migratory birds depend on these habitats, as another honourable member has mentioned, and the richness is part of our identity and is reflected in the Morecambe Town motto, beauty surrounds, health abounds. Nature is fundamental to our lives and our livelihoods. The health of our environment is essential to our well-being, and climate change threatens our ability to give everyone a good life. Of course I will give way.
Make a brief declaration of interest that my former employer, CPRE, are supportive of this bill. Does my honourable friend agree with me that the current rate of climate change, as she's describing in her constituency, poses an existential threat to our most loved landscapes, our iconic wildlife species, the pattern of our seasons, and some of our most valuable farmland, and therefore it is essential that we have a rapid and just transition for rural communities so that we can hand over our countryside in some recognisable form to future generations?
The honourable gentleman for his intervention, and I absolutely agree. Climate change does not affect just one part of our lives. It does not affect just one part of the country or the world. It affects all of us in every single domain. If we are to have a planet that is habitable by humans, We must take action now, and as the Honourable Gentleman mentions, it must be a fair and just transition. So we can't ignore the risks posed by climate change. Severe storms and rising waters are already threatening our homes. Our challenges are growing, and we must take action to protect our communities and infrastructure. Locally, we must be resilient, and nationally, we must work at a system level to meet the challenge. Now, I know that thinking about this can be anxiety-inducing, and I worry for our young people who have grown up with a feeling of existential threat. But I would like to ask members to reframe this challenge as an opportunity to make people's lives better, whether that's through warmer homes, cheaper bills, access to good public transport, good jobs in new industries, or simply through ensuring access to nature for all. And it's an opportunity to turn on its head outdated notions of nature simply being the preserve of the rural, and turn our urban areas into havens for the natural world. Now, I'm a sci-fi fan, and in my wildest dreams, I imagine energy abundance and the progression of technology to a point where we are harnessing and working with the wonders of the natural world, working with the chemistry, biology and physics, which nature uses so beautifully to ensure plenty and comfort for all. On a practical point, what I love about the current political discussion on climate and nature is that it's moved away from what felt like a morality play about individual choices, and is now focused on the systematic determinants of climate change and ecological destruction. Back in Morecambe and Lunesdale, our farmers have always played a key role in managing the land and protecting nature. This is now recognised in policy, with support to manage land to support biodiversity, improve soil health and reduce carbon emissions. Their work shows how agriculture and conservation can go hand in hand. Last year, myself and the now DEFRA Secretary visited a farm in Creagh, which is using natural methods to slow upland water flow using marginal land. This, in turn, prevents lowland flooding. They also had robot cleaners in the milking shed, which was very cool. How we produce our food is fundamental both to our well-being and to the health of the environment. I know my farmers are always striving hard towards productivity and are opening up to new methods of production to address climate and nature concerns. Further north in my constituency, local efforts to protect species like the red squirrel also demonstrate what can be achieved through collaboration. The tentative return of these iconic creatures to our woodlands is a source of pride for our community. In Morecambe and Lunesdale, we're also providing some of the solutions to the challenge of clean energy. As well as wind and solar, Heysham has not one but 2 nuclear power stations. Nuclear power has an important role as a low-carbon energy source. It provides always-on baseload energy and is the only currently reliable and scalable technology that's an alternative to fossil fuel baseload. And for those of you who aren't nuclear geeks like me, a brief explanation of what that means. For our grid to work reliably and avoid brownouts and blackouts, we need energy that's always on. Solar and wind, whilst brilliant technologies, offer variable levels of energy through the day, and our grid doesn't like that. Also, the demand for energy obviously does not go away when the wind stops blowing and the sun stops shining. So there's 2 solutions to this. Storing energy. Now, there are problems with current battery technology, although I must give a shout out to Lena Energy, just over the river from my constituency. They're developing sodium metal chloride batteries, which address many of the issues of current technology. And they let me visit their lab. So back to always-on energy. Nuclear is that only currently available technology. It provides baseload, but without those carbon emissions. And it also provides energy density. It's a really good use of land in terms of providing energy. And in Heysham, nuclear has provided good unionised jobs for decades. In fact, Councillor Matthew Black, a Lancaster City Councillor, just a few days ago, spoke about how his family has had connections to the power stations for 3 generations. His granddad was a crane operator on the build. His dad was a tool maker, one of many connections I'm sure he has with our Prime Minister. And Matthew himself was a labourer there in his university summer breaks. I'd like to take this opportunity to reach out to other members in this House who are not yet convinced on the need for nuclear in tackling climate change. I would urge you to review the evidence. I would urge you to not be bound to shibboleths and to move forward into the future. I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity, of course, to tell you how wonderful Heysham would be for new nuclear. We have the people, we have the skills, we have the land, and we have the transport connections. I will make progress, as I believe Madam Deputy Speaker would like me to. and finally, just talk about some of the things that this Labour government are doing. I'm very proud to sit as a Labour MP on the government benches because I believe we are meeting the huge challenge we face. We are bringing forward game-changing legislation to tackle the climate and nature emergencies. We have an ambitious programme of true change for our country, practically sound and absolutely implementable. We've been taking bold steps. We've published the Clean Power 2030 Action Plan. In the first week of government, we lifted the ban on onshore wind. We've consented to nearly 2 gigawatts of solar projects. We've started a solar rooftop revolution. We've invested in modern technologies, set world-leading targets, reaffirmed our commitment to no new oil and gas, phased out coal, confirmed we'll ban fracking, set up Great British Energy, set up the National Wealth Fund. We've appointed world-renowned climate and nature envoys. We're showing global leadership at COP29. And we've strengthened the energy regulator to ensure it properly stands up for consumers. In nature as well, our government is taking bold action. And I just would like the House to think about that bold action, to support that bold action, and to join me in supporting the new Labour government in its actions to tackle the climate and nature emergencies.
Craig Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is all too often the case in this place and in politics at large that what divides us isn't necessarily the end result. In this case, reducing emissions, in this case, halting the decline of nature and supporting nature's recovery, but it is the means by which we argue that we get there. And that is why I have some serious issues with the Climate and Nature Bill that we debate this afternoon. I say very clearly and categorically for the record, I spend most of my time in this place and in my constituency arguing against those very things that cause nature's decline in the beautiful Buckinghamshire countryside. I spend most of my time arguing against the unnecessary greenfield housing developments that concretes over our countryside and destroys nature. Arguing against those massive industrial solar installations and the battery storage facilities and the substation upgrades that then take farms next door away. The fencing around them that disrupts the deer runs, that actually is harmful and dangerous to nature, that so many in this House have actually argued is the solution to some of the challenges we face. I don't accept that at all, and I don't accept that this bill will help us get to the end goal that I think actually the vast majority of people do want to see. And I'm grateful for constituents that have lobbied me in favour of this bill. The Speen Environmental Action Group, who I sat down with over the summer. We had a good discussion. I don't think we agreed on absolutely everything, but we absolutely agreed on the need for the right sort of action and the right sort of measures that will get us to where we want to go. And from a legislative perspective, I would actually argue, as my honourable friend, the Shadow Secretary of State, set out in his excellent speech earlier, that we already have a legislative framework in which we can work. We have the Environment Act. In fact, it was almost 5 years to this day that I sat somewhere over on the other side in the previous Parliament and delivered my maiden speech in the Environment Bill. And that now, an Act of Parliament, already has an explicit clause to halt the decline in species populations by 2030 and then increase populations by at least 10% to exceed current levels by 2042. We have the legislative framework. Where we've now got to look, I would argue, Madam Deputy Speaker, is in allowing our great innovators to come up with the real solutions, the solutions that don't see the destruction of our countryside and the destruction of nature that goes along with that. I listened very carefully to the Honourable Member for Norwich South, who I think has left his place now, where he gave that impassioned defence of the ancient woodland that was in fact actually in my honourable friend for Broadwin's constituency, but it was a good defence of the ancient woodland nonetheless. And I thought to myself, it's quite rare that I agree with him, but I agree with him on this point. But then I thought to my own constituency, and I thought, well, hang on, there was a project, is a project, that has destroyed so many ancient woodland, not just in Buckinghamshire, but up and down the entirety of Phase 1 of HS2, that the vast majority of members of the 2017 Parliament, on the Labour side, on the Liberal Democrat, there weren't so many of them then, but on the Liberal Democrat side, and other parties, they all went through the voting lobbies to vote for that destruction of ancient woodland in Buckinghamshire and Oxfordshire and Northamptonshire and Warwickshire. It is a position, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I think we all have to reflect upon, because, as I said at the start, we can disagree with the means of getting somewhere, and I think I would invite every honourable and right honourable member to reflect on that which they have actually proposed or supported themselves in the past and the impact that has on the nature challenges we face. I would like to also briefly just touch on some of the issues of the targets that we have in the Climate and Nature Bill that will have severe unintended consequences. My honourable friend, the Shadow Secretary of State, set many of those out in detail, but I think it is worth double underlining that if British industry is forced too far, too fast into targets they can't meet, that will simply drive those businesses, those jobs, those innovators overseas. It won't actually combat any global challenge, it will just move it somewhere else in the world. And I cannot believe the proposers of this bill or anyone else actually want to see that happen. And likewise on this point of fossil fuel. Fossil fuel is going to be needed for decades to come. I've actually been quite a vocal advocate for defossilisation, both on my time in the Transport Select Committee in the last Parliament and in this Parliament as well. But my argument is that we've got technology out there that currently government regulation, not just here in our own country, but worldwide, is avoiding enabling to actually happen and to grow. Because we're going to need fossil fuels. We're going to need something that will still power the 1.4 billion internal combustion engine vehicles that will be on the roads worldwide after this ban on new petrol and diesel engines in this country. And I would put it to this House, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the solution to that is the synthetic fuel industry, making fuel literally out of air and water using the Fischer-Tropsch process. I will gladly give way.
I thank the right honourable member for giving way. And he mentioned a number of Liberal Democrats in this place. I think they were a very effective method of defossilisation on July the 4th election. On the point about synthetic fuels, does he agree that the measures contained in this bill, particularly that will encourage sustainable aviation fuels for aviation and alternatives for internal combustion engines, does he agree that the measures will spur the investment in those technologies exactly as he wants to see?
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his intervention. All I'll say is not in mid-Buckinghamshire from his former point. They tried, but 25% of the vote. Anyway, the point that I would make to his serious challenge is I don't see anything in this bill that challenges the ZEV mandate. Because it's the ZEV mandate that is absolutely obsessed with testing at tailpipe rather than whole system analysis that gets in the way of the development of synthetic fuels and green lighting those great innovators in this country and worldwide to get on with developing that technology. Because, of course, if you put a synthetic... I will give way in one moment. If you put a synthetic fuel through an internal combustion engine, there is still carbon at tailpipe. But that carbon is the same volume of carbon that through atmospheric carbon capture is recaptured to make the next lot of fuel. It is carbon neutral. It is one volume of carbon in a perpetual circle. Yet I see nothing in this bill that will enable those great innovators to actually move ahead and get, as some of them claim they can do, cost parity with the fossil fuel equivalent within a decade. I will give way to the Honourable Lady.
Thank you. I'd like to challenge the right honourable member to say that the one thing this bill does give is very clear direction of actually what this country wants to achieve, and that will help innovators and businesses know where to go, which actually I think under the last government they weren't sure about, and so I'd like to...
I hear the point the Honourable Lady makes, but I fundamentally disagree that we've already got the direction. It was the last Conservative government that actually was the first in the Western world to legislate for 2050 net zero. It was the last Conservative government that passed the Environment Act. The challenges that we face in the development of synthetics, to pose to this example, don't sit in this bill that's before us today. They actually sit in other legislation, which I admit came about through the last Parliament that I voted against, but it is the ZEV mandate that gets in the way of that, because it fails to look at whole system analysis. Who wanted another go? There we go.
My first go, and I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. But actually, one of the things that businesses and car manufacturers said in the previous government that was really hard for them to innovate and achieve those scientific and technological innovations was the last Conservative government's chopping and changing of car manufacturers.
Certainty. The Honourable Lady makes a point about the change that did happen under the last Parliament, but also she's allowing the facts to get in the way of a good argument that there's a reality out there that car manufacturers are finding that if you take fleet sales out, they can't sell electric vehicles. Consumer demand for them is through the floor. Nobody wants them. And that is part of the fundamental problem, where if you take a solution that this bill wants to speed up and put on some sort of steroids, that the innovators get blocked. That it's the technology that's simply available today that everybody jumps on. And that technology sometimes is not the best technology to actually achieve the climate goals and the nature goals, one moment, that we actually all want to see in this House. And I actually, from the Honourable Lady that spoke before me, she spoke of the value of nuclear, which is another great example that when we look at the damage to nature that grand-scale solar and battery storage and so on causes, where you need 2,000 acres of solar panels to produce enough electricity for, on current usage, about 50,000 homes, and you need 2 football pitches for an SMR that will do 1 million homes. Why are we messing about with solar? And that is the fundamental point that I think we should all reflect on when we think about this bill. We think about the legislative framework that we actually need to achieve these goals, and then look at more practical solutions.
Andrew Cooper. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm going to start by paying tribute to the Honourable Member for South Cotswolds for all the work she's done and really the courage that she's shown to get us to this point. I think, am I right in saying that she might have learnt her rowing craft in my constituency and in Norwich, and the strength and tenacity that she's shown today, I would say, is typical of members of that rowing club. So thank her for what she's done. It's a privilege to have the opportunity to speak on this issue today, as alongside the fight against child poverty, it's one of the core issues that defines why I entered politics and how we must act not for today but for tomorrow. We must take immediate and bold action to secure a sustainable future for our planet, our environment, and for our children who will inherit the world that we shape today. The climate crisis is the defining challenge of our times, and I believe bold action is essential for combating it. Climate change and environmental destruction are not distant threats. They are realities that we face today, and they pose an existential threat. The science is absolutely clear. Our planet is warming at an alarming rate, and the resultant consequences are dire. As the Met Office reported just a couple of weeks ago, 2024 was the warmest year on record globally, and the first year that was likely more than 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. From rising sea levels to devastating floods and wildfires to unprecedented heat waves, the effects of climate change are being seen today and impact everyone. I'm convinced that to tackle this challenge, we must commit to a just transition, ambitious targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I won't actually, because there's a lot of people trying to get in, so I just want to make sure everyone has a chance to speak. Ambitious targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions that not only put us on track to meet our global commitments, but also pave the way for a cleaner, greener future for generations to come. We must protect our precious natural ecosystems. The biodiversity crisis is a pressing issue, with species declining at an unprecedented rate. The World Wildlife Fund reported in October that between 1970 and 2020, there's been a catastrophic 73% decline in wildlife populations. It's essential that we not only seek to halt that decline, but also prioritise the restoration and preservation of habitats, ensuring that our I'd rather not. With so many of us looking to speak. My apologies. By safeguarding our ecosystems, we not only protect wildlife, but also enhance our own quality of life. Healthy ecosystems provide clean air, safe water, and fertile land, essential resources for our communities and economy. We must seize this opportunity to drive innovation and create green jobs. As we transition to a low-carbon economy, we can harness the power of renewable energy, sustainable agriculture and cutting-edge technology. This transition will not only help us meet our climate goals, but also stimulate economic growth and employment opportunities in sectors that are vital for our future. Investing in a sustainable economy is not merely an environmental imperative, it's an immense economic opportunity. Too often we hear opponents to tackling the climate crisis as presenting this as all cost. To them I ask, why would you leave this fantastic opportunity to be global leaders on these technologies, to sell our expertise all over the world? Why would you leave that to someone else? I know the government recognises this, and I welcome the action that has already been taken, not only to get us back on track to meet our climate commitments, but also towards creating hundreds of thousands of good jobs and driving investment throughout our country, removing the ban on onshore wind in England, committing £21.7 billion for carbon capture, approving solar projects offering almost 2 gigawatts of power, launching Great British Energy and delivering record-breaking renewables auction, are vital steps in delivering clean power by 2030 and accelerating to net zero. Moreover, we know the public backs action on climate, nature and the environment, with Oxford University estimating support at about 80% globally. Indeed, I've heard from people across mid-Cheshire about their concerns on these matters. Prior to the general election, I participated in a dedicated climate and nature hustings, which were organised jointly by Sustainable Norwich and Winsford Sustainability Partners, who've done a tremendous amount locally to raise awareness of these issues, provide forums for discussion of topics such as carbon capture and storage, work with local schools and air quality projects, and much more. And I take the opportunity now to thank them for the work they have done and continue to do. They, along with people right across the country, are increasingly aware of the urgency of the situation and are calling for bold action. By listening to the voices of the people we serve, we can foster collaboration between government, businesses and local communities, ensuring we create a collective response to climate action that is inclusive, effective and decisive. According to the Local Government Association, over 300 local authorities have declared a climate emergency, and nearly two-thirds of councils in England aim to be carbon neutral by 2030. I'm particularly proud that our first act as an administration after the local elections in 2019 was to declare a climate emergency in Cheshire West and Chester. Perhaps there's a stereotype of Cheshire as a rural county full of cheese, cats and real housewives. But at the time of the declaration, Cheshire West was the fourth highest polluting borough in terms of carbon dioxide emissions, with only Neath Port Talbot, North Lincolnshire and Birmingham ranking higher. As the borough's climate emergency response plan notes, Cheshire West is in many ways a microcosm of the United Kingdom. Few places can claim to have such a variety of key emitters and sectors located in one area, with a heavy concentration of industry in the north of the borough in Ellesmere Port. There are some who would have us deindustrialise, to roll back on manufacturing on any carbon-intensive process. And to them I would say that we've seen the consequences of that type of action before. We've seen what happens when you pull the rug out from under communities with nothing to replace it, and how long it can take for a place to recover. And yet time is of the essence, and by providing the strategic leadership we've seen, the growth in the hydrogen cluster, investment in sustainable aviation fuel production, the approval of a first-of-its-kind carbon capture and storage facility that will take the equivalent of nearly 200,000 cars per year off the road, the latter made possible by this government's commitment to provide certainty for business and invest in this energy cluster in the industries of the future. And of course, this isn't entirely of the government's actions or the council's actions, but if you set the challenge and lead on it and show businesses you're prepared to back them, they will respond, as we've seen with industry-led initiatives like Net Zero Northwest. In my constituency, Tata are in the process of developing another world first. For a long time, Norwich has been synonymous with the chemistry of salt, and following completion of their Following completion of their EcoCarb carbon capture and utilisation plant, Tata has announced they will be building a world-first facility to make the first sodium bicarbonate with net zero carbon emissions. I will conclude now and say let's all move forward together on this fantastic work. Thank you.
Charlotte Kane.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would draw members' attention to my register of interests as an unpaid director of Reach Community Solar Farm. I congratulate my honourable friend for bringing this very important bill to the House and for all the negotiations she's had to try and secure a cross-party agreement on it. I started campaigning on the environment quite a long time ago. My main concerns at those times were that whales were at risk of becoming extinct and we had a hole in the ozone layer. The international community came together and we now see that whale populations are increasing and the blue whale has been brought back from the brink of extinction. We phased out chlorofluorocarbons and the ozone layer is repairing. So when we work together, we can achieve great things. And I've been hugely impressed today and encouraged, with one or two exceptions, with the cross-party agreement on the real need to move forward. And so I do hope that we're not going to throw this away at the last minute. We have a way forward that is going to address a lot of these things. We now know that our challenges are far greater. And we need not just to worry about other species' survival, but also about the survival of our very own species. More frequent and damaging wildfires and floods are taking human lives, as well as destroying property, farm and wildlife. In my constituency of Ely and East Cambridgeshire, farmers are having to contend with rapidly changing seasons, wetter winters, drier summers.
I will. Thank you. Will the honourable member agree with me that this bill strives for that adaptation of farming and recognises the urgency around developing agricultural resilience and sustainable farming practice and actually offers true financial support which will help our farmers?
I thank the honourable member for that intervention, and I absolutely do agree, and I'll be coming on to that in a few minutes. Our farmers can't plant when they plan to, and sometimes they miss a whole crop round. The crops don't fully ripen, so they have reduced harvests. The Ouse washes flood earlier each winter, and the floods last longer. That closes roads and cuts people off from schools and hospitals. Wildlife is hatching at the time it's always hatched, but the food they rely on isn't there, or they can't get access to water, so a generation dies. The climate is changing for the worse, and we're already seeing the impacts around us. If we don't take action soon, many parts of the world will become uninhabitable for people, most animals, birds, insects, plants, and even most aquatic life. my beautiful constituency of Ely and East Cambs will be largely underwater. And as if that wasn't bad enough, that water will probably be salt water, causing tremendous damage to people and wildlife. Our fens have been the breadbasket of Britain since at least the Roman times. They're also an amazing carbon sink. The Fenland Soils Group are meeting next week in their 5th annual conference to bring together farmers, academics, wildlife charities, national and local government and various other groups to consider how they can continue feeding the nation and keep that carbon in our soils and make our soils healthier. I will.
Thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. She talks there about protecting a very unique habitat. In my constituency, we have peat bogs, which are also essential both in terms of restoration and climate change. It's estimated the Great North Bog stores 400 million tonnes of carbon. The Council are doing a lot to re-wet those areas. Will she join me in commending these restoration projects?
I absolutely do commend those restoration projects in the right places, but as I say, in terms of the fens, we need the food as well as the wetlands, so we have to do the right things in the right places. But one of the things I like about this bill is, as my honourable friend said, it does provide the support for the farmers, so when they come up with the ideas for changing their farming practices, they have the funds to deliver those ideas. In the interest of time, I will just touch on one other aspect of this bill that I think is particularly important, and that's talking about how this addressing climate change and the transition has to take full consideration of the poorest in our community. These are the people who live next to the most polluting roads. They're the people who live in flooding areas and can't afford the insurance to help them when they have been flooded. And they're the people who can't afford to heat their houses because their houses are badly insulated and they still depend either directly or indirectly on fossil fuels, and that's very, very costly. So having these people at the centre of this bill is really, really important, because addressing climate change will help these people have a better life, but we must do it through making sure that the transition is fair, that it delivers jobs around the country, and that it doesn't just keep putting financial burdens on people. I will.
On that point, I think what you talk about bringing people with us is so important, and so I'd like to call, would you support also the retraining that is in this, which helps us on that transition of moving forward?
I thank my honourable friend. I entirely agree that we need to retrain to make sure that everyone can benefit from this transition. So in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would just like to say I entirely support this bill.
Would you give way? I will give way. Thank you very much for giving way. And would you agree with Freya from my constituency in South Cambridgeshire, who said, I'm 15 and I'm afraid, because I can do things in the community, but unless we've got joined-up government action, we have no hope. And given that we have the ministers here as a result of this Prime Minister's bill, this bill addresses the yawning gap between the departments. Thank you.
I thank my honourable friend. I entirely agree with her that Freya and the many, many constituents who I know have written to all of us need to be assured that we are working together across this House. So I would thank my honourable friend for working hard to get concessions from government and to get cross-party consensus, and I ask us to hold that together and support the aspects of this bill. Thank you.
Minister Mary Creagh.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I begin by drawing the House's attention to the entries in my register of interest. I'd like to begin by paying a huge tribute to the Honourable Lady for South Cotswolds for securing this debate and giving these vital issues the parliamentary and ministerial attention that they deserve. I know from my time as a new MP back in 2006, running the Children's Food Bill through this parliamentary process, it is a very steep learning curve, and it is clear that there is much to learn around this process and about how progressive change takes place in this House. And in that case, with my children's food bill, I withdrew my bill because I knew that the government was going to do something later that was going to implement the things that I wanted to do. But let me pay tribute, and I'm going to make a couple of opening remarks and then I'll take interventions. For more than 2 decades, she's been a fearless environmental campaigner, and rowing the Atlantic, Pacific and Indian Oceans, she understands better than any of us our planet's beauty, strength and vulnerability to climate change, ocean acidification, global warming. As Storm Eowyn rages across the country and the island of Ireland is under a red alert, it's certainly not a day for anybody to be out on the Irish Sea. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity to discuss the twin issues of climate and nature with her today. And as the former chair of the Environmental Audit Select Committee, I share her passion for measurable, specific, time-bound targets with clear government plans to underpin them in order to achieve progress. And I think what we can say, and what the Committee on Climate Change has said, is that the previous government has been very strong on long-term targets, very short on interim targets to get us to those places. We cannot will the ends without willing the means. I give way.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the Minister with whom I served on the Environmental Audit Committee when she was chair. At that time, we were very critical of the Environment Act and the lack of delivery on a deposit return scheme and on a neonicotinoids ban. Both of those things the Minister has achieved this week. That's about delivery and action. So targets are targets, delivery and action is utmost. This government is undertaking that in terms of nature.
Honourable friend makes a great point, and can I also thank him for the sterling work that he has done campaigning on these issues, not just in Leeds but nationally on these issues. He is right, Madam Deputy Speaker. When it comes to politics, it's all about show, not tell. And as somebody who left this House back in 2019, these were subjects that I cared about even when I wasn't a member of this Parliament. And the climate and nature crisis is what drove me to put myself forward for election again, because I know that this is the place where we can make things happen. And I heard what she said about, there's placards and protests, and then the art of politics is about governing and it's about choosing. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Thank you very much. I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. It's very clear to us that the government does not wish to divide on this issue. In either of the meanings of that word. So can the Minister please reassure those in my constituency who desperately want to see this bill adopted that there will be meaningful change in the government's approach, and that particularly there will be binding commitments on the nature side of this, so that this backsliding we saw from the previous government does not continue under this one?
I give him my assurances on that. But one thing I want to make absolutely clear is this is a long-standing problem. And we've heard from both the father of the House and a former baby of the House. This is an issue that spans... You're not the father, OK, no, well, I'm an almost father of... From a grandfather to an almost baby.
Reflect on those comments before she resumes her speech.
I apologise for accidentally promoting him to being the father of the House, but he spoke as a grandfather and he spoke with passion and energy on these issues. And the former baby of the House also made it. This is an issue that spans generations, that spans parties, and we've had a tour of all the beauty that are in our different constituencies, and I feel like I, along with the Climate Minister, are going to have to go on a massive tour of Britain in order to really do our briefs justice to make headway on this issue. But I also want to pay tribute to the late, great friend of mine, Lord John Prescott. We've heard talk about Kyoto. He showed that a seafarer from Hull could be the person who got climate agreement when the talks were gridlocked. He showed that the nature and climate emergencies are not elite preoccupations. It's not the preoccupations just of landowners or just of protesters. These are the preoccupations of every single working people in this country and every citizen of this planet. And I pay tribute to him and I share my deepest condolences to his family and friends on their loss, and say, do go and see Kyoto at the Soho Place Theatre. You'll get your special extra climate lanyard as you go in. I give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way. And does the Minister agree with me that it's vital we embrace this bill to protect exactly those everyday constituents like mine in Shrewsbury, for whom flooding has moved from a once-in-a-100-year event to a regular misery each year as they pay the human cost of climate change?
I agree with my honourable friend, and she is right that we are investing more than ever in flood defences. So I'm going to make a little bit of progress. We know that we are living through an age of extinction, and that damaged ecosystems are less able to absorb the emissions which we continue to create. 2024 was not just the hottest year on record, but the first to record an average global temperature above the internationally agreed 1.5 degree threshold. From the Valencia floods to the Florida hurricanes, from typhoons in the Philippines to droughts and wildfires in the Amazon, and of course the devastating wildfires that have left thousands under mandatory evacuation orders in Los Angeles. We have seen extreme weather exacerbated by climate change last year, and Dr. Friedrich Otto of Imperial College London has called 2024 a reality check. It shows us just how dangerous life is at 1.5 degrees centigrade of warming. This is not somebody else's problem. This is not our children's problem. This, Madam Deputy Speaker, is our problem. And as our Prime Minister has said, climate change knows no borders. It threatens national security and economic stability. Our mission is to end poverty on a livable planet. So the days of sticking our head in the sand and the days of betraying future generation are over. We are changing course. I give way.
Very grateful for the Minister for giving way. Many honourable members of this House have spoken very ably of the importance of rivers and waterways during this debate and the nature contained within it. Will she continue to work on that issue and address the shameful legacy of the Tories?
Minister. I am going to speak at great length on flooding and water and the measures that we have already taken. So with permission, I will make several pages on that. We know, but let me begin by what this mission-driven government is all about. We know one of our missions is to make the UK a clean energy superpower, including accelerating to net zero emissions while seizing the economic opportunities that come with that. We are back in the business of climate leadership, and we will restore the UK's position as a global leader on climate action, delivering at home and working abroad with our international partners. I will give way.
Thank you for giving way. I will confirm, having been a previous member of the Parliament, that I see a transformative difference from what this government is doing compared to the previous government. And I also absolutely believe in cross-party working. A crucial aspect of this bill is that it ensures that we in the UK account for overseas emissions and ecological damage driven by our imports. Can she confirm that the government will also look at our emissions from our imports?
Minister. I thank her for that, and she is right. The Energy and Climate Minister is here with me on the front bench, and we will have more to say about that. So let me talk about what we have done so far. In COP29 in Baku, our message was clear. In just 6 months, we have lifted the de facto ban on onshore wind in England. We have consented 2 gigawatts of solar power. We've delivered a record-breaking renewables auction after the previous auction under the previous government had no takers. We've established Great British Energy. If he wants to intervene, I'm very happy to stand corrected.
Thank you very much to the Minister for giving way. She says it was unsuccessful in terms of renewables, whereas it's certainly the case that we did not reach the targets where we would like to have got to with offshore wind. In terms of other technologies, it was incredibly successful, including the first ever ring-fence funding for new and emerging technologies like tidal and wave power. So it was not an unsuccessful auction.
Minister.
Well, The talk is cheap, Madam Deputy Speaker. But I think no offshore... He talked earlier, he waxed poetic about the success of the previous government in offshore wind. If it was such a triumph, you have to wonder why not a single offshore wind company turned up to bid into that auction. It can't be a successful auction if you don't have any bidders. Thank you. Right, I will make progress. We have helped to launch new carbon capture and hydrogen industries. On nature, we've launched a rapid... My right honourable friend has launched a rapid review of the previous government's environmental improvement plan. In coming days, we will publish a statement of its key findings, and we will have a revised plan later in 2025. We have delivered the Water Special Measures Bill to improve water quality, strengthen the arm of the regulator to hold companies to account where they do not deliver for customers and for the environment. It will put water companies under tough special measures by strengthening regulation and begin the work of cleaning up our rivers, lakes and seas. I give way.
As a co-sponsor of this bill, can I say I've been so impressed with the way that the Ministry and our honourable member for South Cotswolds have talked and negotiated and brought that forward. Are we willing to act? She asks. Yes, we are clearly willing to act. Can I just ensure that the dialogue continues?
Yes, I'm happy to agree with him on that point, and also to say that the era of grown-up government is thoroughly back in town. We are showing our support for nature-friendly farming by introducing a new deal for farmers, supported by £5 billion in funding that will boost Britain's food security, restore nature and support rural economic growth. On flooding, the greatest risk our country faces from climate change, we have invested £2.5 billion over 2 years. And this is in stark contrast. It's not just in the building of the defences. When you've built it, you've got to look after it. Maintenance under the previous government fell behind, leaving 80,000 properties at risk. And we saw this in York when the Foss flood defence barrier gave way. And, you know, it's just not acceptable that we have flood defences that can be overtopped in a severe weather event. So we've set up a flood resilience task force in order to deal with those, the increasing challenge we face from flood defence problems. I give way to the honourable...
To the honourable lady, and particularly for her generous remarks. As one of you who can remember when the dinosaurs became extinct. This isn't it about the future of our children and our grandchildren and the kind of world we grow up in? If I could take the honourable lady back to her remarks about farming in the presence of the Secretary of State for Agriculture. We're not going to save our agriculture if we smother our fields in solar farms, so-called, and in things like the converter station that the National Grid wants to build on farmland in East Kent. We have to strike a balance between the need to get to where we want to be in terms of net zero and protecting our natural environment. And it's quite clear that the Energy Department and the Agriculture Department are not at the moment talking to each other properly.
Well, having had an outbreak of consensus, I'm afraid I'm going to have to gently disagree with him. We are in the process across government of getting together a land use framework, something long promised by his government and sadly not delivered, under the most ambitious estimates of solar energy. Less than 1% of current farmland would be used for electricity. And of course, for many farmers suffering the effects of climate change, it is an important alternative income stream for them. But of course, the land use framework will set out our approach and be part of our consultation as part of a national consultation about how we intend to measure the competing pressures on our land and environment. We have pledged up to £400 million across the next 2 years for tree planting and peatland restoration, and £70 million to support nature's recovery while delivering much needed infrastructure and housing. We have finalised the criteria for land to contribute to 30 by 30 in England, and we are developing a strategy to accelerate progress towards towards that target. We are also, in the area of the circular economy, making a number of steps to make recycling easier and to ban single-use vapes. As my honourable friend mentioned, this week the deposit return scheme, formulated in government by the party opposite, in opposition voted against. What an absolutely extraordinary position to find themselves in. That is the pace that we will continue to work to restore and protect our natural world, achieve clean power by 2030, boost our energy security, create jobs and sustainable clean growth across the country. But we cannot do it alone. Nature, birds and fish, weather systems go where they want, as do diseases, viruses and pollution. We saw that with ash dieback. We see that with global plastic pollution, where we are negotiating to get an ambitious global plastic pollution treaty. I attended the Conference on Biodiversity, COP16 in Colombia, and the COP29, the climate COP in Azerbaijan. We set out there a range of new commitments. £45 million for the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund. We set up the Cali Fund, which is a new fund for nature, international fund, which will give businesses using online genetic sequence data from plants and animals the opportunity to contribute to global nature recovery. I do encourage people to work with businesses in their constituencies and to spread the word on this. We're looking at innovative funding mechanisms for nature, such as the Independent Advisory Panel on Biodiversity Credits, co-sponsored by the UK and France, which want to scale up high-integrity credit markets and generate more finance for nature. At the COP29, the climate COP, the Prime Minister confirmed our nationally determined contribution would be an 81% reduction on 1990 carbon emissions by 2035. And that does exclude international aviation and shipping, but those two we are following the advice of the Committee on Climate Change, and they are going to be introduced into our carbon budgets, I believe our 6th carbon budgets from 2033. We confirmed at that conference at least £3 billion between 2021 and 25-26 will be spent on nature. And I'm also pleased to inform the House that the UK has been selected to host the next meeting of IPPES, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. This is the Science Panel for Nature. So it's the IPCC for nature. And we are going to have, in early 2026, IPPES 12, which will have a focus on agreement and publication of a business and biodiversity assessment and publication. And we will maximise that moment in our calendar to have a national conversation about the UK's leadership on the science in this area. And it is a real joy for myself and my honourable friend the Minister to work alongside our special international representatives for nature, Ruth Davis, and for climate, Rachel Kite, who are driving leadership, ambition and delivery on nature and climate internationally as we move towards COP30 in Brazil this year. I give way to the Honourable Lady.
You talk about that focus of biodiversity in the UK, and I just wanted, as the MP that represents 4 chalk streams, to highlight the precious land that actually is really unique. There are only 200 in the whole world. So to join me to celebrate that actually we must preserve the uniqueness of the nature in the UK as well.
Minister. She is absolutely right. Our chalk streams and peat lands are our equivalent. They are internationally important. They are our equivalent of the Amazon rainforest, and we do not want the over-abstraction that has led to their depreciation under previous governments. We've had as I said earlier, the Right Honourable Gentleman for Streatham and Croydon North, the Secretary of State for DEFRA, has announced this rapid review of the EIP, and we will set out a clear path for delivering against the Environment Act targets. And we know that biodiversity loss is as much of a threat as changes to our climate. 1 million species face extinction. Wildlife populations have fallen by 69% since 1970. This is why we are resetting our approach to nature and putting it at the heart of our governmental approach. I will give way.
Thank you for giving way. The vast majority of our biodiversity is in our seas, and 90% of that in our overseas territories. So does the Minister agree with me that it is critical that the UK has shown leadership in ratifying the Global Oceans Treaty and signing the Apia Oceans Declaration?
We are looking, I do agree with my honourable friend, we are looking for a legislative vehicle to enable us to ratify the BBNJ, Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdictions treaty, and I know from my conversations with President, name dropping here, with Emmanuel Macron, sorry about that, who I had the privilege of meeting at the United Nations General Assembly, that this is something that he is very keen for us to show leadership on, and people around the world are looking to our country to show leadership. We must not fail. We have the Ramsar Wetlands COP15 in Zimbabwe next July. I could wax very lyrical about wetlands, but I'm going to make some progress. We also have the four nations of the UK, the overseas territories and the Crown Dependency have been working collaboratively to produce a UK-wide National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, NBSAP. We submitted our targets to the Convention on the 1st of August, and we will meet all of those targets at home. But we will publish the full action plan, which I know my honourable friend, the member for Brent, will be very pleased to hear in due course. Let me just move very quickly to the parts of this bill, because I can hear coughing, which is a shame. There was so much more to say. But we are proud to have set these legally binding targets through the Climate Change Act to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. We are committed to 13 legally binding targets under the Environment Act, and halting the decline in species by 2030 is certainly very ambitious. In the proposed bill, the Honourable Lady notes that environmental improvement plans are not accessible to all, and she proposes the establishment of a Climate and Nature Assembly. We agree that engagement with and access to nature provides clear benefits, and we want to help drive action for the environment, including through volunteering, citizen science, and building the innate connection and care that we all have for the natural world. So we will design with our plan with users, and we have agreed to look forward further with young people and get them engaged in this process, as we did during the climate COP. She also, I'm going to make some progress. No, I will not give way. On the climate, we agreed engagement with bodies such as the Climate Change Committee, the Office for Environmental Protection, and the Joint Nature Conservation Committee is key to our achievement of these targets. And we also agree that non-governmental partners have a huge role to play on monitoring, advising, scrutinising progress and plan. I am looking forward to meeting with the Minister for Climate and the Honourable Member next week to further discuss how to take this work forward. I compliment the Honourable Lady on the work that she, NGOs, academics and partners across the climate and nature space, and the impressive campaign that they have driven to get a joined-up approach across both policy areas. This will be a great opportunity to discuss the Environmental Improvement Plan review and demonstrate we are taking our targets very, very seriously. I can also tell her that we are going to strengthen the relationship between JNCC, CCC and the special representatives, because the problem is the siloed approach between climate and nature is dividing work, and this is happening at the international level. The work happening internationally should also be reflected here. We will look at strengthening data reporting on our consumption emissions and narratives around the imported emissions that the bill refers to. And we will, it's often said this is the decade to clean up our planet. We have a Prime Minister determined to make the UK a clean energy superpower and reclaim our status as global climate leaders, a Foreign Secretary who knows international climate and nature action is fundamental for global security and prosperity, an Energy Secretary who's working in overdrive to achieve clean power by 2030, an Environment Secretary who's wasted no time in taking bold steps to restore our natural environment, a government who recognises collaboration across this House and across wider society, and the foundation that nature and and climate provides to reaching our national clean growth mission. We are truly blessed on this island. Natural landscapes, abundant energy resources, cutting-edge innovation, globally leading science, and the power of people and partnership. So in conclusion, while we're under no illusions about the scale and urgency of the challenge, we are confident it can, it must, it will be done. And can I just say, we will create a safer, more secure, sustainable and more prosperous future. I would like to conclude by thanking the honourable member for South Cotswolds once again for bringing forward this issue and working with colleagues for her and across the House to deliver on our climate and nature targets.
I'm going to move that the debate now be adjourned.
The question is that the debate be now adjourned. As many of their opinions say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Aye. The question is as on the order paper. As many of that opinion say aye.
The question that the debate be now adjourned.
Forgive me. The question is a debate be now adjourned. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no.
No.
Tell us for the ayes are Christian and Martin. And tell us for the noes are Ellie Charles and Jeremy Corbyn. Done. Order, order.
The ayes to the right, 120. The noes to the left, 7.
The ayes to the right, 120. The noes to the left, 7. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. Debate to be resumed what day?
11th of July.
11th of July.